Good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Welcome to this STARS webinar. I'm Tony Schönenberger, I'm the Executive Chairman of STARS. STARS is a global platform for dialogue to discuss developments which will impact the society as a whole and our businesses in the next couple of years. I should also mention that next month, actually, we are organizing a symposium in Shenzhen. We are focusing on latest political and economic developments in China and visiting companies like BYD, Tencent, and Huawei. So please visit our website for details. Today, we are starting a new webinar series on sustainability. 5 years ago, actually, only experts were talking about sustainability. Today, it's a must for any company, for any institution and organization to focus on sustainability, to think about the future, to address the systemic opportunities and challenges. Now, today, we have the great privilege to talk to Anna BIRNEY. Anna is Director of the School of System Change at the Forum for the Future in London, UK. Anna, thank you very much for joining this session. We very much look forward to your insights. I want to introduce you now to our moderator, Gordana KIERANS. Gordana is a former professor of international business. Now she is managing partner of her consulting company in Croatia. One focus of her work is circular economy. I should also mention that she is the president of the STARS Southeast Europe Alumni chapter. Gordana designed this important series of 6 webinars on sustainability and the circular economy. And actually, she's also moderating these sessions. So Gordana, thank you very much again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning from Croatia, good afternoon, and of course, welcome to our speaker, Dr. Anna BIRNEY from London. Anna, great to have you. And to our audience, immediately an invitation to get your questions ready, because the conversation that we have only 30 minutes. And I know from experience, listening to Anna is very interesting and the time flies each time. So please think of your questions, and I will start with the first one. Anna, we know the famous quote by Archimedes, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to stand, to place it, and I shall move the world. We all would like to change the world, but how can we identify these fulcrums inside a company? And how do we identify the right levers?
Thank you. You've just identified probably the biggest question there is in the work of systems change. So thank you very much for raising it. And you're right, we all have these very big, complex sustainability challenges. So they might be social, they might be environmental challenges. And a lot of companies now are trying to understand what are those big external drivers that their company might need to be addressing and acting on. But they all, like you say, they don't always know where to put their energy. So finding a lever is about where do we put our energy? Where do we put our time and investment to try to change the world? We can't all do everything. The first thing that we always have to think about is we often think that this is a science, as if there's the correct answer, as if there is a perfect lever to pull. Actually, it's an art. It's really about dancing. And I use the metaphor of dancing with the systems. It's really about understanding the dynamics, the flow of the external world. The market is not something we can control. The environment is definitely not something we control. People we can't control. So it's about how do we move and understand the dynamics of change out there. How do we start understanding it? And that's where systems approaches can really help. It can help us think differently, help us think about those systems, start to understand them. And when we start dancing, it's almost like we start to understand where we can put our feet. Where do we take our next move? Where do we find the potential? And that's when we start to think about, well, what's our goal? What resources do we have? What do we want to achieve? And we're trying to marry up that, what is happening in the world? What is the problem telling us? And what resources do we have and power do we have to change? And therefore, what will help us move towards the goal. So it's really analysis around those different things that helps us try to find the right lever or the right area of potential for anyone in a company to create change.
That's a beautiful metaphor with the dancing. And when we dance on this systems floor with our company, we might hit somebody else who is not vacating the place,
Yeah.
put it that way. We might encounter some resistance also, because not everybody is enthusiastic about system change. System change can scare people. So how do we also, during this process of evolving and adapting to the markets and finding the levers how do we also work with resistance? Yeah,
that's a good thing. And if you don't mind, I might extend that metaphor of dancing, because it is like being at a party, maybe, the fun. And so it's about having an invitation. So the first step you might take is inviting people and really saying, well, what is it that might get them excited? Is it the food at the party? Is it the music? Is it just the company? So it's really understanding what is it that they would want to come and work on? What's their motivation? What would invite them? And you invite them. But there are always going to be people who don't want to be part of the party, right? Who don't want to be invited. And so if you're inviting them to work on a certain issue, they might, like you say, have resistance. So there's also a philosophy in systems change, which is move where has energy, move with where has energy. Wherever there's energy or movement, go with that movement. Go with where people want to move. So it's sort of like going out and just kind of trying to invite them. At one point, everyone has their personal tipping points when they will join the movement, they will join the dance. But you have to kind of keep moving. Don't stop just because you hit a rock or you hit somebody standing in the middle of the dance floor. You have to keep moving and see if they will start getting involved. And it's like a spiral. Any engagement process internally or with external stakeholders will be like this spiral. Invite those who are interested, who are willing, who are up for taking the risks and experimenting, and then spiral that out to engage more and more people.
It's interesting what you're saying, because in our leadership training, we showed the video of this first follower, so that
the dancing one.
Yeah, exactly, the dancing guy. That's the leader is not the most important one. The most important job of the leader is to find the first follower. So that goes in that direction.
Yes, exactly. And who's the cheerleader? Who are your cheerleaders? Who are the people? Because we often only notice the people closest to us, and that causes issues in terms of inequality and big issues of othering, of seeing of people. But it's also a factor in how we interact. We interact with people we know, with our community, with people we trust. And so you've got to keep bridging and trying to work out who are the people that are trusted in that community, who are those people who are followers. And that's also part of your analysis, your stakeholder analysis of who you start engaging on some of these big issues.
Yeah. So this, what you described, finding the right people, I can imagine very well inside an organization. But how do we work with resistance outside?
It's similar. I don't think it's different. I think we're all people, if I'm honest with you. But I do think the role of purpose is really important. The role of finding what is the collective purpose that we're working toward, and really trying to find what that goal is, and that energy that enables people to engage. And that's really an art as well. That's really part of this work, is trying to find the right level, the right thing to engage people. There's some people we work with at the School of System Change. We work with a lot of different contributors in this field, a lot of different people who are practitioners. And one of them talks about, if you can't solve a problem, enlarge it. So it's almost like you need to zoom out to a place where you find a big enough goal, not too big, so it's everything. You find a big enough goal that enables people to engage and go, we can all work towards that. We can all work. And we worked with companies actually on issues of food. And actually it was all about the meat industry, and meat obviously contributing a lot to climate change, but it felt divisive. It felt like it was dividing. And the project actually was, we asked the question, what's the purpose of meat? And it's a kind of crazy question, but we said it was about protein. It's about providing people with protein. And so we called it the Protein Challenge. And we then we engaged with the meat industry, yes, but also the seafood industry, the alternatives, the soy, chefs, people, and people are providing, what's it called? animals with food. So all the way through the supply chain, all the way up to the consumer, retailers, and it helped us think about it as a system. So we had to expand the problem, not just about meat, but it was about protein, and then we could get more people into the room and energize them, engage them for being part of the initiative.
Yes, this is exactly linked with my next question, because this is also linked with reframing the questions that you so skillfully did with the project with City of London. You went from how do we battle plastic waste to how do we hydrate people?
Yes.
So how can company representatives reframe these questions inside the company when they strive for systemic change?
Exactly, that's another example. So when we were trying to look at single-use plastic water bottles, and the key systems skill that you do here is you ask what the function is. What function is that system of water bottles, that system trying to achieve? And so you ask the question, what is the function of that? And the function of that is hydration. How do we get people in London hydrated without using plastic water bottles? And it stopped us then working on waste management issues, and it started us working on creating fountains, creating behavior change to have the refillable water bottles with them. And so we then, this goes back to your first question about leverage, it then determined where we put our energy. We put our energy into building the new system, working with businesses or venues like Arsenal Football Ground or Oval Cricket Ground or the National History Museum in London. And we worked with them to create a new system, not just about recycling their plastic water so it didn't go kind of go into the ocean, but actually about trying to provide their visitors with refillable points and water refillable. So by changing the goal, by changing that, it really helps you understand where you might focus your energy. So the first question you ask is, which system are we in? But what's the function and goal? So that the examples there about hydration or protein, or what's the functional goal of if you're working in the education system? You know, what's the function of, is it about enabling people to become part of the current global economy, or is it preparing them for some of the existential crises that we're facing? And that you might organize your education system differently, and you might engage in a different conversation if you looked at those two different goals, for example.
It's a good point. We will finish with education at the end of the series because I find it extremely important. Again, the invitation to our audience, we have 15 minutes left. Get your questions ready, and of course I will read them to Anna. In the meantime, I will continue with my own. One of the characteristics of the world in which we live is it's very fast evolving. Of course, technology is helping, but also some changes around us, like the climate change that you mentioned. Systemic change is not always fast evolving. It can take years, sometimes even decades. So how can we develop patience and wait for the real change, knowing that we press the right buttons, we push the right levers, and how can we be more patient and in a process avoid greenwashing?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's not, patience doesn't mean that you're not doing anything, or you're not trying, or you're not even adapting and moving with the system. There's something that's key to systemic work that's called non-linear change. So we think that change, when we create a plan, we have a 5-year business plan, and we think that we can go, right, we're just going to go like this. Whereas actually, change happens more like an S-curve, you know, nothing happens, and suddenly something happens. And now we'll see these tipping points probably from a very negative perspective when we see environmental collapse. And so that's also a tipping point. But it also happens from a positive perspective in terms of the shift that you can take. So there's a question of how do you keep moving when you're along the bottom here to kind of building up to that big shift. The first thing is make sure that what you put into the system is what you want in the system, right? So not greenwashing, not trying to do incrementalism necessarily, but trying to put the new intentions, the new ways of working, what you put into the system will slowly become the system. The second thing is we don't spend enough time connecting the dots. So when all these little experiments, all these actions are happening here, we don't invest enough time in trying to pull them together. Almost you have to reconfigure them and put them together to create a new system. And that's the art here of kind of noticing what's happening, and then trying to see if you can align stakeholders, bring people together to create that new system. There's a famous futurist who says, you know, the future is already with us, it's just unevenly distributed. And so we're trying to think about how we come together and redistribute the system in a different way.
That's a great expression. The session itself is called Systemic and Sustainable Change, Opportunities and Challenges for Companies. There are lots of opportunities within this systemic shift. I teach about opportunities within the circular economy shift, but there are also some other changes. And which companies will win in this race? What kind of companies in terms of acceptance of systemic change, and who not named, but in terms, general terms, who might lose the race?
Yeah, and also we need to think about who might not feel like they're winning at the beginning of that journey, right? That's a good point, yeah. Because the current market and the current system is not geared towards you winning, towards actually the ultimate goal, because we're losing. All of us are losing right now. Let's be really clear about this. We're all losing. We're all losing because of inequality. So we have some people, very few people, and I'm lucky enough to be in London and be a privileged person. I assume quite a lot of us on this call are as well, within a privileged minority. And so there are a lot of people in abject poverty who are already losing. Then we're already losing because we are pushing against the edges of our environmental boundaries as a planet, right? So yes, we can say some businesses are winning, but it's within the wrong criteria. It's within the criteria of winning within an economic system that is geared towards economic growth for some, but not for all. And therefore growth is actually creating collapse. So this is an idea in systems about what happens at this level. It's like the analogy we often use is like cancer in some ways, you know, so the cancer wins, you know, it's winning, but actually it kills the body. So if the economy wins, it will actually kill the planet. And so there's something about this idea of winning and losing in the current framework, in the current idea, and it's quite a big concept and it's quite challenging to think about it, I will admit it, means that if we keep thinking some will win and some will lose, that's going to be part of the problem. So the question is what companies are going to be brave enough and courageous enough to say, this is what our planet needs, this is what our people need. This is, we're doing this to provide, what is, again, asking ourselves, what's the purpose of business? The purpose of business is to provide products and services to people, you know, and it's to do it, yes, through economic mechanisms, financial mechanisms, and to use that. But if we're saying we want to provide, what do people need? What products and services do we need? These are quite big concepts. I appreciate that for me anyway, for a Thursday morning, earlier Thursday morning at 8 a.m. But I think we need to start asking those questions, because then when we ask the question of like, what does it really mean to win? To win is for all of us to win and to be a contribution to that. So you can turn, just got my kids out the door for school, I can turn to them and say, I really tried to make sure this didn't happen. I really contributed to that. And that is winning, rather than this idea that we have to compete in the market and we have to have some businesses winning, some people losing. You might, as a business, not make profit. You might be not top shareholders. You might not do that, but you might be winning in other ways. You might be winning because you're really contributing to the viability of our future.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the technology companies are so present in the news. I attended the World Resource Forum this past 3 days, and one presentation exceptionally shocked us about Congo and the cobalt mines. And of course, with us moving more to electrification of vehicles, this problem will amplify, that won't get lower. And so in a sense, while we're talking about how much the technology companies are winning, not everybody is winning in this race. So this is something we need to question. We have another question from the audience. In your opinion, considering the evolving global landscape and shifting consumer expectations, could you elaborate on the sustainability challenges that you foresee emerging for businesses in the future? Additionally, how do you anticipate these challenges might vary across industries and regions? And what strategies or adaptations do you believe companies should prioritize to address these? Thank you, Noreen.
Yeah, thank you for your question. And actually, Forum for the Future, our sister organisation at the School of System Change, has just this week launched a a report called The Future of Sustainability, and for businesses in particular. So I do recommend you have a look at that. I think a lot of the big challenges are kind of known, you know, resource constraints, massive resource constraints. So any business, and most businesses are reliant on their resources. So resources for food, so agricultural businesses or food consumer, fast-moving consumer goods. They're reliant on oil, they're reliant on plastics, they're reliant on how they package their goods. They're reliant on, you know, like you say, the mineral resources that go into technology. The prices, from a very economic perspective, the prices of theirs are just going to go up. We've seen the age of cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. That's not going to happen now. Prices are not going to keep decreasing. They're going to keep going up because we need to put the externalities of the costings into our products and into our products. Then when we talk about services, we're going to be looking at the issues of AI, of new governance, new understanding of digital and what that looks like. So we're also being disrupted by kind of cross-border ways of working. And that's been happening for a long time, but it's continued to happening. It's continued to accelerate. And there's going to be a real shift in what the next generation are going to be demanding. So the next consumer and what they're going to be demanding. So I'm kind of outlining some of the trends and factors. But as I went back to that first question, the idea is, how are these things coming together? So it's not about identifying necessarily one of these big issues. The environmental, the social issues, the dynamics of population, all of these things are going to come together. And so the critical thing for business is to do the analysis of what is their external environment, what is the dynamic around them, and to really see how that will affect their business. And all of it will, but it's almost saying, well, where can we start affecting change in that area? So I hope that starts to, it's not that I can't give you, right, in Asia, you need to be doing this, in, you know, North America, you need to be doing this. I think you've got to do that landscape analysis. And critically, the dance continues. So you can't do it once. You have to keep having an eye on how those things are changes. And a lot of our organizations and businesses are not set up for that adaptability, to adapt, to be in that constant adaptation. And that's part of the problem, is not actually what adaptive strategy is, actually putting an adaptive strategy, truly putting that at the heart of the way you run your business or organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. Next question. Instead of changing the system, how about adapting to the system? This may be more promising. What is your opinion? Thank you.
100%. I think we are both changing and we're putting agency into the system. We recognize our own agency in the system. And you can't just, I'm sorry, I'm going with this metaphor today, the dancing. You can't just force your partner. You have to adapt to what they're doing if you're dancing with somebody. So you're both putting change in the system and you are constantly adapting as well. And I love this phrase and use it quite a lot in the work we do. We're living change, you know, we're living with the change. We're moving and adapting. And I think as we're seeing more and more discontinuity, more and more massive shocks and changes, we're going to have to do it. COVID was the prime example, the first, we could say, of some of these big global shocks. So we are going to have to get better at our resilience and how we adopt adaptive strategies. I think the age of long-term planning is dead, but that's not about future planning and constantly thinking about the long term, but almost setting out a plan for 5 years or 3 years is almost not the way to go. We have to think about 5-10 years down the line, but we have to almost be constantly adapting with our strategy. So it fits very much with that first question as well. So I love that question in terms of, yes, both and changing and adapting as we go.
Well, COVID, that was a perfect example of us intervening in the wrong way in a system, and you know, the going into areas where we shouldn't be going, and setting free viruses that we are not, you know.
Yeah, and we weren't ready for how to. So it's not about being ready with the exact medicines or the exact. We're not ready with the processes and the way of governance of organizing ourselves. So we're not putting in the process orientation as businesses, as maybe health systems, as educational systems. And that goes back to my thing about education. We're not training. I mean, I started my career very much working in education system change, and then spent time in businesses and communities and government. But education is my first passion. And I don't think we're teaching our children how to have that adaptive mindset. We teach them knowledge, right? We teach them, you know, my kid's excited about his science today. Great, lovely. He's learning he's learning science today as his first lesson. But we don't teach them the skills. There's just not enough about the relational skills, the leadership skills, the personal resilience skills that are needed. They're sort of tagged on the end of the day rather than as a core way of how we think about it. And I think that follows through to all our systems. We're not setting up our systems as these adaptive organisms.
Well, Finland is changing that because they understand that the future engineers, future business leaders are in the elementary school right now and need that. One more question. You just mentioned that there needs to be a fundamental systemic change in order for everyone to win. Understand this as a move away from capitalism, from the growth concept. How realistic is this in your view, and how would you see this happen?
Yeah, great question.
Thank you,
Big
Emmanuel.
question as well. So it's quite interesting. We can often imagine the end of the world before we can imagine the end of capitalism. I don't know how exactly it's going to happen. Like because we have our films, you know, the Armageddon, the kind of collapsing of the system. I think it's about this adaptation and finding new models of economy and reframing what we expect of it. I don't have the perfect answer. I know there's some amazing economists and people. Actually, one of my best friends is doing her PhD on this at the moment. There are some amazing work out there of trying to understand it. We can also learn from people of the past, or people whose wisdoms have been marginalized, indigenous wisdoms about reciprocal economies, about really putting different ways of interacting with our world. And we can actually scale those up and think about those, about new economies of ways of working. So I think it's possible. Before we had some of these models, we didn't know they existed. The question is, can we start trying and experimenting with what it looks like? I know that COVID's a great example. You know, sharing of community assets was a massive thing in my community during COVID. You know, we know how to do it. It is there. We just have to be brave enough to try to experiment with it. And it's hard. I do want to say this work is really hard because it's like fish. We can't see the water we're swimming in. We're all in the water. We're all in the capitalist system. We're all part of it. And I think we do need actions that change it within the capitalist system. But I think the time has come where we need to recognise we really need to start exploring and looking at alternative models and investing in them properly, because, you know, the future of us all kind of relies on some of this. Yes.
We also have to see that in some parts of the world, capitalism did help lift people out of poverty. Exactly. I mean, I lived 4 years in China, and that was very, very visible and beautiful that people can afford a different life, not so much different products or so many products, but a different life. So we have to balance that.
Yeah, there's one quick thing I'll say. I know we're getting to the end. Is the next model will solve the problems of our past. So I think capitalists solve the models of our past, right? It was right for what we needed. The industrial age was right for what we needed. It gave us amazing healthcare and gave us amazing innovations in science. We now need to say that model doesn't work for us anymore. So we need a new model.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But we have to think of a model that we can to replace it, that helps people live a better life. Yes, we are at the end. We have 1 minute. Thank you all for your questions. And thank you, of course, Anna, for your wisdom sharing with us. And of course, you can be found on LinkedIn. Where can our viewers find you?
So you can find us on LinkedIn, and we can also look at the schoolofsystemschange.org to find some of our programs. And also I mentioned forumforthefuture.org as well, our sister organization who does work with businesses on sustainability as well. So those two organizations. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, I use the forums, 10 business models, 10 circular business models in my lectures. It's very helpful.
Great. Lovely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.